this video's kind of ironic considering I haven't been on BookTok for months due to burnout, which I'm still kind of experiencing as I work out how to post on there again. Once upon a time, I had little indication as to what books were popular until I came across the Clock app and BookTok. Thank you to my cousins. And it's been about 2 years since I first looked into the BookTok side of TikTok and started actively participating. She says as she hasn't posted a video in ages. And the books that I have read thanks to BookTok have offered me a bunch of wild perspectives and a love-hate relationship with BookTok once I finally found books that I was interested in after seeing a slog of fantasy smut. And typical me, with the books that I have now read thanks to BookTok, I wanted to dissect my love-hate relationship. My name is Amy Rosenfeld, and today we are discussing whether or not I trust BookTok. Alright, so for my little research, I have come up with a system. There are 4 rankings these books are going to get, and each are going to have a point value. If I love this book, plus 2 points. If I liked this book, plus 1 point. If I didn't want to keep this book, minus 1 point. If I absolutely hated a book or I did not finish it, minus 2 points. If I get a positive number of points at the end, then I think I trust BookTok, especially if that number happens to be over 5. If I get a negative, then we definitely have a problem with BookTok. Let's dive in. We're starting off with, off the top of my head, what is the very first book that BookTok convinced me to buy, and that is The Bone Season by Samantha Shannon. I'm just going to talk about the first book, as I have currently read every book in the series that is out, at least to my knowledge, and may have to check if book 5 has come out yet. So I guess, spoiler alert, we do have a positive score, but just how positive? The world building, though dense, was amazing and delivered in what I consider a digestible way despite the amount that was being thrown at you from the first book. And the way that cliche narrative tools were used, like flashbacks, was actually refreshing and actually part of the story, which I enjoyed that angle it took. The characters in the first book were a mixed bag, and so there was a lot of them that I was unsure about. But if the fact that I dived into the rest of the series didn't make my opinion of this book obvious, I like The Bone Season. For all of those reasons, The Bone Season gets a score of +1. Next up, we have a very popular fantasy book, Shadow and Bone by Leigh Bardugo. A lot of the story did fall into cliches and archetypes, and that didn't entirely matter to me. I will say, the main character felt very inconsistent to me, and that bugged me. And while the writing style was easy to read and very accessible, it lacked flavor. It felt like every other first-person fantasy book out there. And when reading from first person, to see character, that's more important to me than anything. A lot of people say that even though this first book has what a lot of people consider to be cliches, this was the book that started those trends. But I've seen Lord of the Rings, which was cliche central for the same reasons. I liked Lord of the Rings still, in spite of how much was predictable and stereotypical, simply because it was the root of many fantasy concepts today. I liked it in spite of that. The same cannot be said for Shadow and Bone, whether it originated there like people said or not. And while it was arguably well written, it had nothing shiny for me. For that reason, this book gets a -1, so don't expect me to be reading Six of Crows anytime soon. The Poppy War by R.F. Kuang is up next. For a lot of this book, I thought I actually would like it. Very well written characters. An incredible world with Chinese, Japanese, and Taiwanese inspirations. I love cultural-based world building. However, I realized while reading this book, and with the pacing this kind of plot creates, I don't like military fiction. My opinion of this book is 100% biased. I didn't like it as much because it wasn't my thing, but if I did know somebody who was into military fiction, then I would recommend The Poppy War. There was nothing that made me personally want to keep it. Simple as that. -1. Red Queen by Victoria Aveyard was a book that I had some struggling relationships with. For the longest time, I thought it was going to be a book that I wanted to keep. And then the third act happened. I have a hard time trying to like a book when we get to an act and things absolutely change. There was one character that went from a selfless charmer kind of persona to a mustache twirler as a twist villain. What the fuck? Everything else was so promising, and I am so spiteful of that third act and the stuff that happened thereafter as a result. And for some reason the main character still thinks that the mustache twirler could be redeemed? Come the fuck on. This book is a very confident -1 for all that went wrong. Now we have Iron Widow by Sharon J. Shao. If you've been on this channel with me long enough, then you already know how much I gush over this. I love Iron Widow. It has so many of my favorite tropes and a writing style I could follow along with and love to pieces. It was my first read of 2023, and this far into 2023, still my favorite read. It comments on so much in that world and our own world. A historic retelling, fantasy tech, culturally rich world building. This was the book that inspired my content dictates form video because I could not stop thinking about this and how much it actually related to Sondheim's content dictates form mantra. In case it wasn't obvious, this book is a +2. I would give it more, but my system was flawed the moment I made it. Now, in my BookTok endeavors, I was looking for books that would tickle my asexual fancies and feature more characters like myself. I heard about this one before BookTok, but I wasn't inclined to pick it up until I saw how people were talking about it on BookTok, and that is Loveless by Alice Osman. I had never felt more visible than when I read this book. This was in spite of me not sharing the exact same identity as the main character, Georgia. She is both asexual and aromantic, whereas I am just asexual. But if a book is able to make me feel valid and share the same things I feel, especially coming from another asexual author, I instantly love it. This is another very obvious +2. I should also say this book has been one to inspire me to write a book with an asexual protagonist, which I'm developing very slowly and will likely be the next big endeavor after ASTER'S CODA. Burn Down, Rise Up by Vincent Torrado was a book that intrigued me as a dark fantasy taking place in New York. I love an urban fantasy, and as a huge fan of Dimension 20's Unsleeping City and what I read on the blurb, I was looking forward to this novel taking a dark angle of similar things. That's where the good parts end. The world building and the historic inspirations of this novel were very strong, but as a result, everything else was weak. So many characters the same that I could not differentiate between maybe beyond name, and even now I'm starting to forget who they actually were. And things were too easy for the characters to get, which is not a good thing in a dark fantasy. This book was a -1. Moving on to everybody's favorite lesbian necromancers in space book, Gideon the Ninth by Tamsin Muir. I like this book, but I don't gush about it. This may have been because of how disrupted I was while reading it, and it was confusing to piece things together when I didn't read it sometimes for days at a time. I think the main romance wasn't warranted either. But the world was unique, and exploring the necromantic magic system was really fun. It was good, but I'm not inclined to call it great yet. This is a +1. Forbidden Healing by Rachel Watson. Now this is probably the first book you've heard of that's not super popular on a BookTok list somewhere. Watson had a modest following when I picked up this book from her, so I had to give it a try because she was a very compelling person on the app who was marketing her book. And this was a very strong debut. I like how this book didn't demonize a religion, just the people within it who are making it corrupt. I feel like in modern days we don't quite see that angle as much. You either get the entirely good religion or the entirely bad religion. And the characters in here were very easy to distinguish and to connect to. As a result, I will be getting to the rest of her books very soon. I hope Rachel Watson gets the success that she deserves. This is a very solid +1. The last one I finished before filming this video is The Atlas 6 by Olivia Blake. Similar to reading Gideon the Ninth, I read a densely informed book with massive gaps in between each reading at times. It made it harder to read, but that was made up for by a very intriguing ending that made me want to read on. The writing style is inaccessible for someone who doesn't read regularly, I think, or maybe has English as a second language and is not fluent in it. But all of this was headlined by some strong characters. So this is another +1, but Not a confident +1. I may change my opinion when I read the second book, The Atlas Paradox. So after all of that, I have a score of +4. I don't know if I expected to do better or worse. I think this more just goes down to me being a beginner bookworm and still trying to understand what I do and don't like in the books that I read. Which is odd because I like to go for a variety of books and having chances to dip into things that I normally wouldn't try. The only thing I know I don't want to read right now is smut, war-heavy stories from the Poppy War, and terrible twist villain plays from the Red Queen. Furthermore, I will say that the algorithm has recommended more books to my tastes as time went on. And a lot of these books I bought quite early in my BookTok endeavors. So my tastes may have been altered from when I bought those books versus when I read them because I didn't read them straight after I bought them. And that being said, I still have a ton of books that I've discovered through BookTok that I need to get to. However, I am still excited to read these other hyped BookTok books and to see whether other recommendations may come up now that the algorithm knows me better. Expect a part 2 on this, possibly next year, depending on how fast I read what I need to get through. If you did enjoy this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe if you are new around here. You can ring that bell to find out when I post more creative content. ASTER'S CODA, technically a BookTok book, even though I'm not really on there much now. If you like portal fantasies and enjoyed the movie Men in Black, this is a book that you should definitely pick up. You can also check down the description to find my TikTok when I eventually, you know, get more active on it, my Instagram, and my website. Stay creative, everybody, and I'll be seeing you in the next video.